Okay.
Well, welcome to Coffee and Poets.
Thank you.
I'm here. I'm Bob Stanley, and I'm here with JoAnn Anglin, a local poet and activist, and we're here at the Twin Lotus Thai Restaurant on Folsom Boulevard in Sacramento. And we want to thank Joe and Kai, as always, who allow us to do Coffee and Poets here. Just a brief uh, information: Coffee and Poets has been going on for maybe a decade and with the different interviewers and different poets, and it's really a chance to just talk about poetry. Why poetry? What do you do with it? How does it work? And JoAnn, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. It's good to see both of you in this feeling of coming out of the pandemic finally
Yes.
in person.
And one of the reasons I wanted you, well, I've worked with you. We've done stuff together over the years, but I know you've done such interesting work working in the prisons, doing classes with inmates and getting them excited about writing.
Mhm.
And in addition to that, you're one of the founders of Escritores del Nuevo Sol, and you worked with Francisco Alarcon, and you just have such a wide range of poetic traditions and ideas.
Thanks. I feel like I've been really, really lucky. I came to poetry late compared to a lot of people. Um, I think I was probably 50 when I decided I needed to take my own writing more seriously. I'd been writing in other venues. And then I discovered the writing group, Los Escritores del Nuevo Sol, when it was just getting underway. And so that's been extremely important to me.
And I know you've mentioned that Francisco was a huge influence on you.
Francisco Alarcon and Arturo Mantecon at that time were on the board of La Raza Galleria Posada. And they had started, both of them were writers and mainly poets. They had started a series of readings called the Floricanto. And so I attended those. And on one of them, the writer Ana Castillo was their guest poet. And afterwards, at the end of the evening, Francisco said, "You know, we have been talking about it. We decided we're going to start our own taller or workshop about poetry here at La Raza Galleria Posada." Uh, Me being non Latino, I wasn't sure, so I called and talked to the director at the time, was Terry Romo. And I said, "Would it be okay if I joined?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, absolutely." And that's where I met so many people that I've dealt with. Francisco Alarcon is, in addition to his enormous talent, he was also one of the most generous spirited persons I've ever met. He was forgiving, he was humorous, he was generous, and if you've known him, you never quite get over. It's one of those people you never quite get over the loss, but
Yeah.
but what he's done remains.
I brought a copy of his book here. I've got Borderless Butterflies, and
Hmm.
all of his poems he translates in from Spanish to English or English to Spanish. So I think
Hmm.
I heard the other day every book that he has is in both languages.
That's my experience
Yeah.
too.
And
Yeah.
then he also speaks a Central American dialect or
Nahuatl.
Nahuatl.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's parts of Mexico. Yeah.
These are earth
Yeah.
haikus. I'm going to read a couple of his poems, and he dates them too. Primordial poem, the maternal heartbeat of 9 months. And then a few months later, July 2011, the night, a cup of black coffee poured over the earth's tablecloth.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had
That
an
sounds like him.
amazing way with words.
Yes.
So you want to read a poem or two of yours, and maybe we can kind of launch from there.
One of the poems I haven't read for a while, and I don't know if you remember Felicia McGee. Felicia used to be around a lot, and one night I was at her reading, and on my way home, I kept thinking about what she'd shared. And the phrase came to my mind, you can't blackmail a poet. There was that whole revelatory things people did. And that became my poem of the same name. So I'll read that. You can't blackmail a poet or threaten to tell hidden secrets. Don't try to hold poets for ransom. They have no money. Their friends haven't any. Don't waste your time on coercion or warn to release shameful stories. They are nourished on scorn and will brag of every downfalling. Hostages to their own churning pasts, why would they fear revelation? No, they themselves tell the shocked world about every big and small crime, fear, and doubt. Forgive me, they plead with their small purse mouth smiles, displaying their sins in public confessionals. Who could betray them when they, with relish, sell their lives and their souls, turn themselves inside out, all their seams showing, tossed out like rags in the street, showing their naked tattoos stenciled in stories of shame? How could you torture a poet? The poets torture themselves, knowing their secrets, lose their dark power when hanging from pins in the body, waving like flags of surrender. Confessions shimmer in poets' eyes, cradled in tears of forgiveness. The poets long ago ransomed themselves, counting out words of regret in trade for the jewels of pain, bargaining humiliations, paying on the accounts of their lives in ledgers of pride written with tears.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's a new piece.
No, no, that's probably, I don't have the probably a dozen or 15 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking as you're reading it, I'm thinking first I'm thinking about the people that I know, the poets and all their seams showing, and then the more you kept talking about the sadness and the difficulty of being a poet, and then I started thinking about Keats dying at 26, and then I've been reading Chinese poets, and I'm thinking about the Chinese poets who lose their jobs and they go up into the mountains and become poets and recluses, and they never talk to anybody for 10 years. And so it goes back a long ways. That's a great piece. What's it called again?
You can't blackmail a poet.
Is that in the book or not?
No,
No.
it's not.
Okay.
I'm trying to think what it was published in, but it was also on this CD that I gave you recently.
Yeah. Okay.
So
See, you can. That's your section is. Oh, so there's 3 poems on the CD.
yes,
Oh, okay. That's cool. So are you writing a lot these days?
not as much. One of the things I loved about working in the prisons or teaching a class is I always commit to doing every assignment I give. So I'm not giving as many assignments even to myself. This weekend I gave a workshop at a conference, and so that was really, really good. And I not only got a couple poems out of it, but I got some inspirations for others. Yeah, I have ended up, whenever you belong to a group, the organizational stuff can kind of take you away and uses that whole different part of your brain than the creative stuff that you want to do.
Yeah.
So anyway, but yeah, I still write, but I'm not writing as much. And I thought about that when I was going through some of my prisoner poems about
Yeah.
that too.
So when you were going to the prisons, when was that? For how long and where and what?
Well, it was before the pandemic. For 8 years, I taught a weekly class, actually 2 classes in a day for those 8 years for a week. And it was up in what's called New Folsom Prison. It's actually called Sacramento something prison, but anyway, but yeah. So it's the prison system has, I guess it's 4 levels. And the old Folsom prison is called level 3, and New Folsom is level 4. And so those are the guys, and they are all guys, whose crimes were considered more serious. And I never asked guys what they did. What I kind of concluded that they had been involved in murders or major robberies, armed robberies, you know. But we never talked about that in our
Yeah.
discussion. I felt like, that was always the first question people would ask me,
Oh, right.
what have they done? What are they like?
Yeah.
And my reply was always, I don't deal with that part of them. That's a whole other part of them that I'm certainly not qualified.
Yeah.
So I just deal with the part of them that is looking beyond that creative possibility within each person.
So you'd bring a lesson, and it would be like a 1 hour class.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
how many in the group?
Typically, let's see, the one class I usually had 8 or 9, and the other group was usually a dozen. Yeah, so yard B and C. Yeah, and it was a nice size group. It was like any class, you could tell some people had really worked on the assignment. Some had done it probably an hour before they came to the class. I, said to one of the teachers once, I said, sometimes it's like teaching junior high. And he said, it's a lot like teaching junior high. But it was never boring. I loved every day of
Wow.
being up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you bring some of their work, or?
I did bring some. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Okay.
And I looked through, it was hard to choose. I will pick one of, well, I won't say the names of the poets, but anyway, one of my favorite guys who wrote a lot. He was very conscientious. And I guess this is the sad part. Somebody that had come from a different circumstance, he should have been a grad student at Berkeley.
Wow.
He just had that kind of intellectual capacity and whatever. But anyway, he wrote this about the life where he was now. Tired eyes observe as hopeless feet drag along the deep cracks in the asphalt, cracks deepened by countless blue bodies, meandering about like cattle out to pasture, their minds ready to succumb to the injustice, listening to the negative monologue created by self, but will perish with conscientious effort. For it is today that forward movement is acknowledged, rewarded even, especially when old defects of character vanish and are restored in abundance with new content. Gone are the endless rainy days that were followed by fog, cloudy, judgment diminished, leaving clear skies. Follow the sun that breaks through the sorrowful cries of yesterday, of yesteryear, and enjoy your awakening. So that was Charles. Um, this one is a little bit longer. So his name is Kevin. It's called Voices. How do I express what needs to be said with all these voices running through my head? How the hell do I stay focused and, of course, strong with everything in my life going completely wrong? Whose shoulder can I cry on? Who can I turn to when the walls are closing in and I've no clue what to do? How do I express order with the depression growing inside when, as a man, I've been taught to hide behind my pride? There are things I want to say to myself and to the world, to my mother, nieces and nephews, and especially my little girls. But for some reasons, the words never seem to come out right. I'm a man, a lonely man who grows weary of this solo flight. Over time, I've realized I'm no longer the man I used to be, which is cool, except I'm not even sure of my new identity. The only thing I'm sure of is that my skin is still brown. I don't know if this is midlife crisis or mental breakdown. Does that mean I'm overly sad, have lost touch with my roots, or evidence of a new man with new interests to boot? It's tough to dwell in living hell and keep your head to the sky. I try my best, but succumb to stress no matter how hard I try. Change comes to us all whether we welcome it or not, and the only cards we get to play are the ones we already got. This, in and of itself, is enough to drive a man insane and have him pulling out his hair, trying to silence those voices in his brain.
Whoa.
Yeah, so that is,
Did they read out loud in class to each other?
yes.
Okay, so how did that go?
I think it went pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did.
So I would guess the class bonded to some degree.
Yeah. And one of the things is interesting to me is that what I came to understand is a lot of the people came not to learn poetry so much, but some of them came to get away from the yard, which was a more dangerous place. And so they liked, and it was a nice change for them also. One guy came in one day and he just came with his friend. And at the end, he said, "I'm so surprised how interesting this is." So anyway,
That's good.
yeah.
Well, so just kind of a little intellectual spark that they didn't expect, but then they realized it
Yeah,
worked for them.
yeah. And I think, you know, realistically, most of the people come from backgrounds where that being articulate is not has not been, how do I put it, in them so much. Maybe not what they have come from, where there's been more value on sort of that macho, showing strength, showing not backing down and everything. But where this is valued to show yourself vulnerable, and I think this comes across in both of these.
Yeah.
It's a whole different experience for them.
What kinds of prompts or poems did you bring them? What were some memorable
Well,
sessions?
it varied. I would first of all, I get a lot of online poetry. Every day I get things from Poetry Daily and the Poetry Foundation, and now Slow Down, and all of these. So I would see one poem where the theme kind of caught me, and then I look for other things that were related, although peripherally at some time. So I always came with sample poems of 3 or 4 usually.
Okay.
And so we would read those poems and talk about them, and then talk about things that came up in the poem and so forth. Sometimes we would just talk about language in general. One of the guys that was really, really good in attendance was interesting to me. He was Vietnamese in his background, and he said, and I it was one of those things when they say it, you go, "Oh yeah, of course," but it didn't dawn on you. But because he was Asian, people expected him to be very intellectually gifted.
Okay.
So it was that particular kind of
stereotype,
whereas probably the black and brown students had the opposite kinds of stereotypes to deal with. Um, but yeah, so I have to give credit to California poets in the schools. When I first retired, I was recruited into that organization by B. Herrera, a friend to many of us who recently just died. And so for a year, I trained with B going into the schools. I had never been a teacher, so the idea of doing a lesson plan, and I still use that. I lead a discussion group twice a month connected with my religious affiliation. Um, so I learned to do that and to come up with that. And also, I'm strong on asking questions, very strong on asking questions. And sometimes, as I say, I try to convey other things about language in general. One of the mistakes I made, but that's how you learn, right? Was when I mentioned that one of the changes I saw in language that's hard for me to adjust to, because I spent a lot of time doing editing and proofreading, is with the outness, for want of a better word, of the gay community and the use of the plural. pronoun to refer to one person.
They or them, yeah.
Yeah. So I gave that example for my first class that day. It was a big mistake because they all went off on this big homophobic rant. So I didn't do that in the second class. But anyway, and one of the other things I'll mention is, and you might have noticed this in Kevin's poem, there is an inclination to do rhyming.
Right.
Yeah, and and it's probably both influences and is influenced by hip hop and rap and so forth. And plus, the first words we learn when we grow up, the first poems are rhymes.
Sure. No, a good rhyme is still
Yeah.
a
So
good thing.
anyway, so that still goes on.
Got any others from the class? Other poems?
I brought a couple others.
So this was from New Folsom Prison
Yes.
in the 2010 to 2018. That's right. Yeah.
Exactly. So okay, so here's one, Mr. Percy. What I miss. I miss the nighttime. I miss the early morning nighttime. I miss the evening sunset nighttime, say toward the end of a hot summer day around 7:30 p.m. And it has finally cooled down, but it's still warm. So you have car windows down and hit the freeway with some Curtis Mayfield playing, with your left arm out the window, throwing deuces to your folks as you drive by with that cool night air hitting your face as the pitch black night sky sparkles with its bright stars, glistening like a handful of diamonds poured out and scattered on a black satin sheet. I won't miss these closed in gray concrete walls, the rainwater stains on the walls, the writing on the walls, the bullet holes on the walls. But for now, I can close my eyes and see through my walls and see the nighttime sky.
That cool night air hitting your face.
Yeah. So that was a good thing.
So that's JoAnn Anglin reading a poem from one of her students at New Folsom Prison. This is Coffee and Poets. I'm Bob Stanley, and we're here at Twin Lotus Thai Restaurant on a Tuesday afternoon. And so you probably miss going up there and working.
I do.
With, yeah.
I do miss that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, life has a way of filling up your time.
Amen.
And so I appreciated looking back at some of these poems too. And for a while I would kind of try to follow. If you look online at the correctional system, who's still there, who's moved on, and so forth. One of the guys, while I was there, was transferred down to Vacaville. And to my big surprise, I got a letter from him in my mail at home one day. So he was very close to one of his brothers. And I suspected, you can look up anybody on Google. So he probably had his brother look up my address. And he sent a note to me and then to the rec therapist that I worked with, Carrie Zamora, and saying, I've come to realize how much I appreciated that, how good those times were in those classes. So it's, yeah.
That's the best.
Yeah, it is. It is absolutely something you feel so grateful for that, because you're never quite sure how much it goes along, and but that was a good thing to hear.
That's
Yeah,
a good thing.
yeah, and some of our best poets in Sacramento have taught in the prisons too. Susan Kelly DeWitt, of course, is one. Tracy Gordine has not only taught there, but has some wonderful poems about her experience teaching in the prisons too. So,
and Laura Gillard now.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Susan and Tracy, I think they were probably the first ones to do that.
Probably. Yeah.
Do you think it changes your work or changes your writing in any way?
Probably not, to tell the truth, except for the writing I'm doing that goes along with my assignments. In those cases, I find myself probably touching on subjects that may not have occurred to me, or who knows, maybe it would have.
Yeah.
I mean, you never know where that inspiration is going to come from. And yeah, so as a writer, when I was at the conference this weekend, I was at one of the workshops, and I don't even remember the context, but somebody used the word permissions, and all of a sudden it just, it's like it reverberates in your brain that you start thinking about that. So I think that's what I will next write about is permissions and that idea.
So you'll get a word and it just sticks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's like it still sticks. Sometimes between the living room and the dining room where I go to write it down, it disappears.
What was that word?
Yeah, exactly. Or it comes to you in the shower and then it gets washed away with the shampoo.
Well, you did say though that knowing that you're going every week and you're teaching 2 classes every week,
Yes.
that and if you're writing twice a week, you're writing in the class or you're doing your own assignments, and I think that's
Yes.
a question that poets always have is how, or new poets, right? Well, what am I supposed to write about, or how. I always say something like, well, write 100 poems and maybe 5 of them will be good or 2 of them will be good.
Yeah.
But then they say, well, how do I write 100 poems? I don't have, and I guess it's that, always having a prompt or something, letting yourself write about anything
Right.
is
Yeah.
kind of a way into that. So
I think that's true.
sure.
Lately, I've been kind of interested in words that are used in more of a marketing or commercial sense. The one I haven't followed on, but I keep thinking about and making notes is when we're online, there's always whatever site you're looking at, there's something that says terms and conditions.
Oh yeah.
I think terms and conditions has a whole lot of potential. So I might end up someday having a chapbook called Terms and Conditions.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I've been wanting to talk about your chapbook, which is called Heat, and I was reading it, and there's a lot about heat. I mean, it seems like it's very thematic.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to read one of these poems,
Good.
and there's just a lot of intensity here. So maybe you could read a couple, and we can talk a little bit about the
Sure.
book and how it came out the way it did. This is called Second Degree. The rice scraped from the pan's bottom, the scorched curl of the potato chip, marshmallow aflame. Who discovered this? Who are we? Singed at our edges, fingers blistered from the times we moved too close to the heat. If only we had known how we could heal, scarred, but with a richer taste. How some of us must endure the injury to reach our fullest flavor, to glow.
Thank you.
I thought that was really a cool poem.
I think I like you reading it better than me.
I love the rice I think it's the Korean places where you get that crispy rice on the bottom. Oh man,
Yeah.
that stuff is so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so tell us a little bit about Heat and maybe read a poem or two. And this is just
Sure.
a cool chapbook.
Well, you might know Jeff O'Neill.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Jeff has published several chapbooks from local poets, and I was talking to him about it, and he said, "I'll do one for you." And I said, "Cool, good." So then I started thinking, "Oh my God!" And I looked through my poems, and I really found out that the topic of heat, flames, burning came up a lot. Now I don't know, maybe I don't know why I don't write as much about the other elements, but anyway, but that one came up a lot. So a friend of mine said, "Wow, how did you write all these poems so fast?" And I didn't. They were poems I've had for a long time. And then just the title, Heat, just seemed to lend itself completely to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, and it was a very nice experience. Jeff is really nice to work with, and he brought me examples of suggested things for the cover, and so I picked these two that's on the front and the back, the impressionist painting, and so I can't remember. I think maybe we did 50 at the beginning, and we've done that twice since then. So,
And his press is now called Three Bean Press.
well, it's three bean. I can't remember.
It used to be Little
The
M.
little M.
Yeah.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think his
I-
his daughter didn't want to be known as Little M anymore.
Well, and he has three kids. I think is why it's three beans.
Oh, Three Bean.
Three little
Okay.
human beings.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, any poems? You want to read a poem from here?
Sure. Um, well, the first one actually was a combination of there was that film. There's been information about the fire at the Triangle Shirt Factory, and I think that's what led to this first part called "Forgetting Away." Use the fire escape. Z stepping down the brick outer wall. Essential as a skeleton, a clean way to leave via window to window, and with landings for moments to gulp air, recalibrate grips, reconsider temptation of plunge into air. If only we could take ourselves this way, descend via logic, measured, away from what burns, not linger to snatch another heated yearning, lifted in shimmering warmth. But what if you go up the fire escape? Choose not to flee, to abort escape, and run then too, not away from the objects that make you angry, sad. And there is a surprise choosing. Before you, the peaceful river, flowered fields, a pouring of all you have missed, even deletion of every argument and injury. And yet you turn back to the heat and crackle, run into the conflagration of your life. And, I probably had a little bit of 9/11 in my mind when I was writing that and seeing the people leaping out of the building.
Well, so it was the Triangle Fire, but also 9/11, and
That started it, but then, you start writing and then it goes off in its own direction, you know.
well, I think the poem, the first poem, right, "Forgetting Away," when you've got it's 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 not clear who the person is. Reconsider temptation of plunge into air. It's kind of this airy uncertainty. There's something about escape, right? There's a fire escape. And then you get this moment where you say, if only we could take ourselves this way, descend via logic, measured away from what burns. And so it's like a volta, right? Where it just kind of turns, and then all of a sudden we're all thinking, oh, that's me, right? This is a poem about me. I think it really connects with the reader right there.
Good.
It just kind of okay. It did for me because and then when you explained that it was about the Triangle Fire, and that even brought it home even more. But I do love that turn there. It just kind of goes a different direction. You're going, wait, I wasn't sure what this poem was about, but now it's about this.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, thank you. One of the things about poetry, I was I was raised Catholic. I haven't been one for over 60 years, but anyway. But my friend Sandy Wasserman, who you might know, used to say, "You might not be a Catholic, but you're always drawing on that for things." And so this poem that I'm going to read, I think, reflects that, called "The Playground End Times." Burning or drowning, which did we prefer? And so we tried to picture death with so many lessons about the afterlife and lacking experience of real death. We did not admit of just fading away. Besides, filled with stories of martyrs, full of an expanding present, We were sure death required the momentous, a burning building or airplane crash, plunging into a river, being crushed by a mob. Not just leaving here, but entering elsewhere dramatically. The lurid, being run over, shot, or stabbed. Let us picture the future. With no word for a void or simple absence, we needed something more to enter heaven or hell.
When I read that one, I did pick up on the Catholic, and it was kind of like the lapsed Catholic.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you write, so these come from different times in your life. You kind of collected them. Do you revise a lot? Do you keep them around and then work on them, or are they just kind of there and then you pull them out and you go, they're ready to go?
I think the best way is to just kind of write stream of consciousness and then go back. And it's almost never perfect to begin with. Um, and I actually have been in the public reading and have changed the reading, revising as I go.
As you're reading.
Yes, and because maybe I've made the foolish mistake of not reading it aloud before then. And when you mentioned the prison, that was one of the things I always mention that I discovered late on is the word on the page is not the same as the word said out loud. And so that's a whole different thing. And I think the out loud is a little more trustworthy.
Wow. Yeah.
So then I'll go back and
That's a good
change.
way to put it. The word out loud is a little more trustworthy.
Yeah. So.
You can take that line, or I can take it, but we can't. We can't both use
or
it.
any of our friends here.
Yeah, that's right. Who knows where it could be? So you do go back and tweak things a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
And so one question I had, projects. You mentioned maybe another chapbook, but what are your ideas for the future? What do you want to do with poems and teaching and books and readings? What's in store?
Yeah, I don't know if I'll be doing any more teaching. I have let my membership in Poets in the Schools lapse. Um, so I don't know. And that's, well, in some ways very similar, in some ways very different from teaching in the prison.
Yeah.
Teaching is teaching. Um, but I do, I will keep writing. I have ideas, like I say, for something called Terms and Conditions. One that I'm sort of working on is called Sympathy Pains. And I kind of stapled it together for an event that I sold, but it's very rough yet. So, and I have things I can draw on and things I want to write.
And the Santa Cruz workshop that you did just a couple of weeks ago, was it a prompt or?
It was an idea that I have thought about. Again, speaking of Catholic origins, um, that I have thought. Well, there's always the monthly, not monthly. There used to be the annual workshop put on with Casumnas River in the Hart Senior Center.
Right.
Okay, very good. And I did a workshop there once, which I felt really good about. So another one I've thought about doing is called Days of Obligation. Okay. So when you're growing up Catholic, there are 10, I had to look this up.
Okay.
10 holy days of obligation that you have to go. It's a sin not to go to church on those days.
Oh, okay.
But again, what I thought about is, is every day a day of obligation?
Yeah.
Do we have days of obligation to our coworkers? Do we have days of obligation to our spouses or our children or our parents and so forth? So I started opening it up. As I say, I always like to bring sample poems that sort of address that. And I really had a hard time finding the poems. I had a little bit of panic. So I found if I looked up not obligation, but duty or responsibility, I could find some of that. So I brought those. And, so I wrote, we had a good workshop, and I got really good feedback afterwards about that. The conference itself is an organization called Círculo, which is Spanish for circle, the circle. and and it is a group that started, I don't know, about 8 or 10 years ago. It evolved again. Speaking of Francisco Alacon, there was an exhibit at the Crocker Museum called Our America, and it was put on the exhibit started out by the Smithsonian, and it was Latino artists throughout the country. And so Francisco Alacon and his friend Francisco Aragon,
I know Francisco.
Francisco from Notre Dame, I think. Anyway, they coordinated the local thing and brought several of us to the Crocker, and we wrote ekphrastic poems, poems based on artwork. So there was a mix of Sacramento poets and Bay Area poets, and I think at that time there were even a couple poets from LA. And after that experience, Francisco and a couple of the poets said, we should keep this connection together. And so that became the group called El Circolo.
Okay, the circle.
Yes. And so they've been having, and first it was on in person, but then it was on Zoom. And this was the first year. It was so Saturday it was in person, and we're going to do it on Zoom this coming Saturday.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so I don't know. We'll see. But anyway.
I wanted to ask about the days of obligation. It's kind of an interesting idea. So you were imagining that every day could be a day of obligation. So it's kind of like, okay, today's August 8th. We have to figure out what is it.
What am I today?
What
I'm
am I
obliged
supposed
to
to
be
do?
here with Bob Stanley. That's my obligation.
And if you don't, then you get lots of good guilt.
Yes. yeah.
But was that the prompt in a way? The prompt is to think of it, maybe think of what are your days of obligation, that we all have certain ones. I mean, there's birthdays and there's.
Yeah, so I just used excerpts from other poems as kind of the prompts. Laura Ann Boselar, I'm not sure of the pronunciation, who's a poet from Texas, I believe, had this wonderful poem about making the bed. And, and then, not that I ever do that, by the way, but anyway, but how that's an obligation from some people. Somebody else talked about the obligation of attending a funeral and so forth. So I had like 8 different ones.
So you were able to find plenty of them.
Yeah, and then we had like a discussion, and then people wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. I was just amazed. One person said, "Oh, I wrote 3 different items here today." So,
that's always, as a group, a facilitator or teacher or whatever, that's always a good feeling.
That was really good. What I am embarrassed about that I'd forgotten. One of the people in the group said, they said, "Oh, did you get that from Richard Rodriguez?" And that's one of his books. Is called Days of Obligation.
Oh dear.
Yeah, so I did.
And he's a famous facilitator, group leader.
Well, he's a famous writer. Yeah. And I had forgotten that. But anyway, so I'm glad somebody else brought it up.
Well, you came up with it on your own. So.
Yeah, from my own history. Yeah, and works of art are copyrighted, but titles are not. So that's good.
Okay. Well, it's interesting to me that you come up with these ideas, kind of project ideas, and you're able to write poems that kind of fill up. Mm-hmm. Like heat kind of happened, but that you had so many things in the one. Mm-hmm. I think my work is maybe more all over the place, and maybe yours kind of fills up specific themes. But
well, it's kind of starts out all over the place, but then, as I say, with heat, I looked back and I realized that theme kept coming up over and over again. And when I was writing one poem, I was not conscious of having written the poem about the rice, for instance.
And it wasn't even climate change heat. It was just heat in many ways.
Yeah.
Many ways.
Yeah.
Well, you want to maybe read 1 or 2 more?
Sure. I'll read one that's not in the book, but when we were talking about using marketable or commercial terms. So this was not very long ago, and it's called Market Rate. Somebody decided who can live there, not here. And someone conspired the rationale, the reasonable compromise, and claimed the alternative to be equal, mostly. Some humans knew how to use, to make documents, and slid in the provisions, the tweezered words, laid in the terms some realtor could understand as a version of problems and could say, they have their own, which is there and not here. Anyway,
Market rate.
yeah. And then one other one I'll read. You might know Michelle Wood. Well, Michelle is, she's actually more of a storyteller, fiction writer. But recently at the Poetry Center, we were talking to Patrick Rozelle, and she said to Patrick, have you read JoAnn's poem called Jesus Goes Swimming? And at a fundraiser for the Poetry Center, she said the same thing to Andrew DuBose. And it's a poem that actually our good friend Lawrence made into kind of a mini, trying to think what the word is. Anyway.
I know what they're called.
Yeah. Thank you.
What,
but anyway.
What are the broadside? I was going to say chapbook. Yeah, yes. Broadside.
So anyway, this is one that people have got. I include it when I give when I sell my chapbook. And I've had more than one person say, oh, I have that taped on my kitchen cupboard. I have 2 grandsons and a daughter and a son, and, families are infinite sources of complications, conflict, and interest. But anyway, so this was an inspiration from one of the grandsons years ago. Jesus Goes Swimming. The little boys are learning to dive. Jesus could dive easy, they say. He could go off the high dive like nothing. And if he wanted, he could stay on top of the water and just slide across. Heck, one says, he could even walk right across the swimming pool. And the other says, he could even walk on his hands across the pool. And the first one says, actually, he could even stand on one hand on the water. And there he is, I can see it. The boys go on to talk about penises and baseball, dogs and quesadillas. But me, I'm still at the swimming pool, seeing Jesus standing on the water on one hand, waving. So, anyway.
Well, JoAnn, this has really been fun.
Good. Me too.
And it's good to hear your poetry. This is kind of a cool way to do it here. And we are here, so it's Bob Stanley here with JoAnn Anglin at Twin Lotus Thai. Our producer is Lawrence Dinkins, Ensa'a. And this is the first 2023 version of Coffee and Poets. We're happy to be back. Thanks to Joe and Kai for allowing to use the restaurant. And JoAnn, thanks so much for joining. It's good to hang out.
It's a delight. Thanks for inviting me.